Welcome to the Sirius report. This is Paul, and today I'm assessing why a massive intelligence leak poses a serious threat to the West and also to Israel. So, what does this concern? Well, there were statements came out from the Iranians who said they'd acquired, to quote, a treasure trove of information related to Israeli nuclear and military centers, as well as the names of scientists and military personnel. Now, of course, immediately people will say, well, is this just a psyop? Do they actually really possess anything of any substance? Is this just trying to rattle some cages in Israel? And we'll come on to why it rattles cages over and above Israel itself. If it indeed is legitimate bona fide intelligence, then the question next is who's responsible for providing Israel with this, Iran with this? Well, clearly there must be moles or leaks coming out of Israeli intelligence, which would be deeply worrying for Netanyahu and his government. Then the other question is with regards to the issue of the intelligence. Is this been something that's been going on an awful lot longer than people anticipate? And that wouldn't really be that surprising. And then the question is, why would they release this statement now and basically blow their cover that they possess the intelligence? Well, the implication is, from my perspective, this is merely the tip of the iceberg. And in fact, Iran possesses an awful lot more intelligence, which therefore should have nations in the West as well deeply concerned, because it will no doubt relate to them as well. And in this regard, it's worth noting the following, that this so-called treasure trove of information that Iran possesses or claims to possess says it includes millions, I quote, of pages of valuable information related to the Netanyahu government. The documents contain data on previous and current weapons projects, projects to upgrade and recycle old nuclear weapons. This is where it gets very interesting from a Western perspective, because it says joint projects with the United States and certain European countries. Who those European countries are, we don't know, as well as complete information on the administrative structure and individuals involved in nuclear weapons development. Now, I would suspect that this is being released now because a lot of that information would have already been utilized during those skirmishes between Iran and Israel previously on the two occasions. And I think Iran would have been in possession of information that would have assisted them when they struck targets in Israel previously and assessed what we perceive to be weaknesses in the Iron Dome. And they obviously did that on two separate occasions. But what I would say with regards to the joint projects between the United States with the United States and certain European countries, it begs the question, what are those projects? Now, we all know that Israel has denied having nuclear weapons, and therefore the question is, does this intelligence really sort of rip the scab off that particular wound that has been in place for a very, very long time? I don't think anybody really seriously doubts Israel possesses them. The question is, if they're upgrading and recycling old nuclear weapons, who in the West is assisting with this? I mean, and therefore it could start to also reveal an awful lot of entities involved, including institutions, which actually therefore puts them in a spotlight they'd rather not be seen in. The other question is, from my perspective, if they're prepared to release this information, the implication is they have an awful lot more that they're not revealing, and that is where it starts to become a major problem and a serious threat, not just for Israel, but also for Western countries and their involvement with the Israelis, but also other projects, other intelligence that is very, very damaging from the West's perspective to be in the hands of the Iranians. Now, I know some people will say I'm speculating. To some degree, I am, but I'm firmly of the opinion they're not going to play their hand in totality. This is just an indication. Look, there's a mole that exists clearly in the ranks of Israeli intelligence. We're exploiting that, and now is the time to tell you, the world, that we are in possession of this intelligence. The question now will be asked, what is it they possess? What is it that they have that could be very damaging and compromise Israel's own security? And to what extent have these moles been in place for years? It could be decades in some cases. And how much information have they been feeding? And we know, of course, there's a lot of cross-pollination between Israel and the United States. Therefore, that then would need to start to question what intelligence are the Iranians in possession of with respect to the United States, and by extension, NATO countries, which would relate to these certain European countries. I don't doubt those countries have been told to work with Israel and keep rather quiet about it, because the less people who understand what's going on, the better. But still, the overall implication of this is what is the extent of a treasure trove of information, as they phrase it. If there's millions of pages of information, that must be over and above what they've admitted to. Now, obviously, if you look at previous and current weapons projects, that will probably detail very extensively what those weapons are. And if you have designs, etc., then you can then counter those designs and counter those weapons, which might be why the Iranians seem to be able to handle the situation with the Iron Dome rather easily. Okay, the argument might be the Iron Dome is actually useless, and there are plenty of people who have come to that assertion, and there is legitimacy in saying that. But if you're looking at upgrading and recycling old nuclear weapons, who's involved in that? Is that involve the United States? Does it involve the UK and other countries in Europe who are in possession of nuclear weapons? It's quite likely. And in terms of upgrading them, who is in the West involved in those projects? And could that information leak out with specific entities involved in this, etc., etc.? These joint projects, again, might also not just directly relate to nuclear weapons. It could be a whole host of other projects. But if you have the administrative structure and individuals involved in nuclear weapons development, that is potentially very dangerous when you start to have the names of people involved because of what Iran could potentially do with that information. Now, I grant you this could just be a psyop. And there might be some legitimacy in their statement, but all of it is blowing it out of proportion. But from the West's perspective, from Israel's perspective, they're not going to want to take the chance that is a bluff call. It might be, of course, a desire to antagonize Netanyahu, to rile him up for some reason, which is equally not a good idea. But if Iran's doing it, they must be doing it for a reason where they feel they could take advantage of this. It might be they think it's politically very damaging, and it might start to ask some serious questions about the entire governmental structure, security structure of Israel, which puts more pressure on Netanyahu also in terms of the clearly obvious strains that he suffers within his own country, not least inside the political structure. So there is that to take into consideration. The obvious question then is, who's Iran shared this intelligence with? And I don't doubt Russia's in possession of it. I would suspect China's in possession of it, and maybe other global south countries. I'm not entirely sure that information would have been shared with other countries in West Asia, but it's possible. But this seems to me that Iran's trying to turn the screw. They're trying to utilize this as leverage to, in essence, maybe give the West food for thought, the United States particularly. We know Israel is itching, or seems to be, to have another go at Iran. When is debatable, but I don't personally, and I've made this point many, many times, which is why nearly 2 years after October the 7th and the Hamas invasion of Israel, that was never a pretext for the US to go to war with Iran. The US does not want to go to war with Iran for all the reasons we stated previously, given they're in no position to do so, given the amount of Iranian forces compared to US forces. Not that it'd ever be a ground invasion, this would be utter nonsense, but also in terms of their weapons technology. And also, there is a fear in the West that Iran does possess nuclear weapons. I think that is not the case, but they could be very close to doing so. Although that kind of feeds into the idea that Iran has been in a position to make nuclear weapons for decades, but never quite gets there, even though apparently they're 2 weeks away from doing so. But in essence, what this does is it starts to have to focus minds in Washington a bit more as to what they're dealing with, and that potentially this gives Iran leverage in the ongoing talks that are happening between the Iranians and the US privately to say, look, we possess an awful lot of very damning information, and if this gets leaked in the public domain, it's going to cause maximum embarrassment and worse for you as countries. So, maybe you want to think twice about what happens in the future, and you want to do everything you can to deter the Israelis from launching another military attack, because this time it's going to be a proper war. The last two times we reached an agreement where you could blow a couple of things that we'll go and blow the base up in Qatar, the US's biggest base in West Asia, because you moved everything out and let us do so. We let you pretend that you blew up our nuclear facilities, neither of which is true. And we all walked away and everyone was very happy. Then it all gets forgotten in the news cycle. It does get forgotten every 48 hours or so, or whatever it is. This time it's not going to be the same. And there's no doubt that the West and the United States particularly, and the Israelis, have started to realize that Iran militarily possesses far greater degree of sophistication of technology than they ever understood. Although why they didn't understand, I don't know, because it was in the public domain. It was very obvious. But again, that's the belief. Well, that's just propaganda. So overall, the question is this a psyop? I don't think so. But could it be blown out of proportion to provide leverage? Potentially. But if they do indeed possess millions of pages of information, that will have been accrued over a long period of time. Someone just doesn't turn up with a, to put it in crude terms, a USB stick, loads millions of pages on, then sends it. This will have been leaked over a long period of time. So someone inside the rank is leaking it. Is that also that there could be someone in the ranks of the West, in the United States, in European countries, who's also leaking intelligence to the Iranians? It's very, very possible. So this should get people in the West extremely nervous. Thus far, there doesn't seem to be much of a response to this. It's all rather under the radar, which suggests to me they're scurrying around trying to find out the extent of the damage that this could pose. But for me, this is in reality a massive intelligence leak with enormous ramifications, not just for Israel, but in a broader sense for the West. And people should be extremely worried in the ranks of governments, in the ranks of intelligence, to the extent of what this is. Because if, just in a very simple sense, Israel's nuclear program is there for all to see, after constant denials, that alone is a major problem. Because it's one thing people accusing Israel, it's another thing of Israel denying it. But it's another thing if there's stonewall evidence that proves, in fact, it is true. That therefore then creates a huge, enormous political hot potato in West Asia with other countries, not least, of course, tellingly, we have this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which includes, an Article 5 type NATO scenario, which might, in inverted commas, lead to the risk of a nuclear confrontation. Does this come off the back of what I'm saying now with regards to this intelligence? It's possible. And therefore, because countries like Saudi have become aware of this being definitively the case and the extent as to which these weapons programs, recycling and renewing old nuclear weapons is true, and therefore they're going to react and say, well, we want to protect ourselves. We're not having a situation where one country in the region effectively has these weapons and none of the rest of us do. Okay, you don't want us to have them directly, so we'll have them indirectly via this relationship with Pakistan. So these could be related or interrelated. It's entirely possible. I mean, so I think, therefore, this is a story that might have some mileage. And on that basis, it was worth bringing it to your attention. And with that, we end this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, for all your ongoing support, which is greatly appreciated. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment, and also hit the notification button. But we're being told increasingly by people they're never notified. So just keep checking. We put content out regularly. Just go to the channel and see if something new's up, as we're doing today. And with that, I'll then say goodbye.